They said they did it to help. Everyone would know their place. It protected the kingdom, the world, they said. Not many objections arose. After all, it had been the same for over 100 years. They had the voice, the power. We were weak, and they weren't concerned if a person or two spoke up against them. Fighting for equality, fairness, humanity, that person was never heard from again. What damage can one of them do, they said, laughing in their lavish homes, taking from the defenseless without batting an eye, thinking themselves invincible. That was their first mistake. Pride, the deadliest killer. Letting their guard down, luring themselves into a false sense of security. But their biggest misstep was forgetting. Forgetting that the biggest fires start with a single spark. It was happening again. The city didn't know it yet, but the sky seemed to anticipate another life was changing for the worst. The dark gray sky emanated a distant roll of thunder. A whisper of rain fell as people hurried from one shop to the next, completing their errands as quickly as possible. They felt a certain unease that had nothing to do with the weather. The rainfall intensified as a carriage appeared. Its ebony gilded edges and obsidian-studded build screamed wealth. A pair of white horses raced across the cobblestone streets, forcing those in their path to leap out of the way. The coach's entrance sent murmurs rippling through the crowd, and parents clutching their children a little tighter. Anyone who saw the carriage could predict the reason for its arrival. It did not take much guesswork, since they came for only one reason. Another child was to be taken. A clap of thunder sounded as the knowledge spread through the city like a wildfire. Some shook their heads in pity. Others were angered, once again slapped with the fact that they were powerless. A lucky few sat in blissful ignorance of the truth. Yet one of those few, living in an orphanage on the most secluded street in the city, wouldn't sleep tonight with that bliss, and would never wake up with it again. "I'm going to find you, Jax," a girl no older than 10 wove through the many cots squeezed together. She dropped to the floor and looked beneath a cot, frowning when she saw nothing but the stained wooden floor. Rising, she looked around the cramped room she lived in at the orphanage. Her eyes caught on a moving lump covered by a sheet by the door. Tiptoeing over, she whipped the sheet away. A little boy with light brown hair squealed and scrambled away. "I found you," the girl laughed as she grabbed him. "I won." "Again," Jax giggled. "Let's play again." The girl was about to reply when she heard hooves clattering outside. She raced to the small window and peered through. A carriage slowed to a stop in front of the building. 2 guards in pressed white uniforms opened the carriage door, revealing a man in his early 30s with pale blonde hair cropped close to his head. Although the girl had difficulty discerning his features from such a distance, it was impossible to miss the silk fur-lined coat the man wore. The coat was a far cry from the simple drab clothing the people in the city wore, many of whom couldn't afford a simple one to keep out the bitter bite of the winter cold. The garment would have cost the wealthiest merchant his entire fortune. Yet, as a man allowed his coat to drag along the filthy ground, the girl believed it had meant nothing to him. She caught the sight of the crest adorning the side of the pristine white carriage and stared. Her knowledge of the court was minimal, but she, and the entire city, could identify the symbol. It was the crest of Rioda. 2 daggers crossed behind a snarling snow-white wolf. The crest could only mean one thing. The man outside was the Lord of Rioda. The province that the city of Dela and the orphanage resided in. The girl's heart beat a little faster at the sight of the Lord, and her hands trembled slightly. The world outside thundered alongside her. Anxiety and drops of rain stumbled over each other in their sudden haste to reach the ground. The Lord of Rioda beckoned to someone in the carriage. A moment later, a girl with hair a bit darker than the Lord's that fell in long, curling locks descended. The blonde girl inspected her surroundings and turned up her nose at the garbage spilling out onto the sidewalk, cringing at the muddied street. She was reluctant to enter the hall, ugly green building housing the lives that would soon be ruined by none other than herself. The Lord led the blonde girl towards the orphanage. They were oblivious to the orphans staring down at them in confusion, wondering why anyone would come, let alone nobility. The girl felt a pull on the hem of her shirt and looked down at the little boy tugging her. "Who's that, Carolyn?" He pointed outside. "It's the Lord of Rioda," she replied. For some reason, speaking of the man put an uneasy feeling in her chest. She pulled Jax closer, as if her arm would protect him from the sins of the world. Jax simply cocked his head innocently, observing the approaching nobles. Carolyn fogged up the window with her breath and wiping at it with her tattered sleeve, hoping for a clearer picture. "What are you doing up here?" a shrill voice demanded. The girl spun around, twisting Jax along with her. She came face to face with an extremely red-faced woman. This spindly woman had a horse-like face with beady black eyes. Her thin eyebrows furrowed in anger, giving her the appearance of one eyebrow instead of two. "Don't you know who's coming today?" she barked. "Miss, Carolyn began. "The Lord of Rioda. Our Lord, you stupid girl." Miss Elodie's eyes narrowed on Jax. "Boy, go to your room," she snapped. Carolyn lifted her arm and Jax ran out of the room, eager to leave the wicked woman. The second he left, Miss Elodie continued scolding the girl. "I have been working nonstop all day to make this place and you rats presentable. All while you," the woman pointed an accusatory finger at the girl, "have been sitting up here gazing out the window and daydreaming." The woman grabbed Carolyn's wrist and pulled her to the door. "But, Miss Elodie, I have been telling all of you for days," she continued to rant as she dragged the girl down the narrow staircase. "No one helps me around here. I constantly provide care for the lot of you without a sliver of gratitude in return." They reached the bottom of the stairs, and Miss Elodie threw her arms wide. "Do you see how clean this place is? All this is my hard work." The declaration might have been believable, if it wasn't for the exhausted children with cleaning rags and brooms on the floor. "You, up!" Miss Elodie snapped her fingers. The orphans immediately jumped and ran up the stairs. "But, Miss Elodie," Carolyn began when she felt she wouldn't be interrupted. "You never said anything about anyone coming." The girl, along with the rest of the children, were in the dark about any arrivals. Carolyn staggered backward, holding a hand to her stinging cheek. Miss Elodie's hand was raised from the backhanded slap she delivered. "Never accuse me of lying," she hissed. "And don't ever dare to question me either." The girl's anger simmered and she clenched her fist tightly. But she kept silent. She wasn't surprised, though. Miss Elodie constantly singled her out, but she wasn't sure why. The woman hated her without reason ever since she woke up in the orphanage 5 years ago. It was like the girl had offended Miss Elodie by simply being alive. A knock sounded at the door, and the woman's red-faced, tightened expression relaxed in an instant. She waltzed to the entrance, plastered a smile on her face, and then threw open the doors to the orphanage as if it were a grand ballroom. "Welcome, my lord." Miss Elodie dipped into a curtsy. Carolyn darted behind the stairs, peering out. Noting she was the only orphan downstairs. Anxiety pooled in her stomach. Yes, yes. The Lord entered the orphanage, followed by the blonde girl wearing a white coat like the Lord's black one. Behind them came the two guards standing stiff and straight. The Lord took in the creaking floorboards and peeling green walls with what Carolyn swore was a hint of satisfaction. The girl with him, however, was completely revolted. "Father, must we be here?" she whined in a prissy voice, pouting her pink lips. He turned to her with a dangerous expression, and she shrank back. "Come, Valentina. We will not be here long." Valentina huffed but stepped forward. The Lord put a hand on her shoulder, and she stiffened at the touch. "My daughter, the Lady Valentina. She is 11, so of course that age is preferable for a higher likelihood of success. However, if there is anyone with more potential, bring them." "Yes, my lord." Miss Elodie bowed her head and turned to the staircase. She paused for a moment and then rattled off many names. One by one, children trickled down the stairs. Carolyn studied the Lord as he watched the descending orphans. The Lord's blue eyes, so pale they were nearly colorless, examined each and every child. His nearly non-existent lips, separating a crooked nose and chin that slipped into his neck, curled into a sneer at the ragged orphans that gasped or squeaked in fright at the sight of him. He was tall, towering over the smaller children, but round from a life of laying around mercilessly over taxing citizens. The man's strangely toned dark amber skin shone orange beneath the harsh lighting of the orphanage. But the feature that stood out the most to Carolyn was the band of gold circling his pupils, the distinguishing mark that set apart the powerful Aurelians and the barren standards. They stood out eerily against his irises and almost seemed unnatural, as if the color did not belong there. She shuddered and clutched the pendant hidden under her shirt. It had always felt like a symbol of comfort, although she had no idea where it had come from. Miss Elodie's voice interrupted her thoughts. "This is all of them, my lord." The woman gestured to a group of about 10 children huddled together. "Might I ask if she possesses any abilities herself?" Miss Elodie nodded to Valentina. "Of course she does," the Lord snapped. "Why else would I need a child for her?" Valentina bristled, brown eyes flashing in annoyance. I apologize, my lord." Miss Elodie sunk into another low curtsy. "Show them," he commanded, pushing his daughter forward. Valentina scanned the room. Her eyes landed on an old rocking chair, and she stared at it. It glimmered for a moment, and her fingers twitched. A layer of frost crawled up the chair's legs. The seat was right across from Carolyn's spot beneath the stairs. The ice made its way all over the chair until it was entirely encased. She looked to Valentina and watched her with a mixture of awe and jealousy. How wondrous it would be to have such powers! The wood of the chair was still visible through the thin ice, but the layer grew thicker as Valentina exerted more effort. The chair then burst into shards of ice. Carolyn cowered and covered her face with her arms from the flying fragments. Once she felt it was safe, Carolyn poked her head out. Valentina's fair skin had a light sheen of sweat. She exhaled deeply and crossed her arms, the arrogant expression reappearing. She looked around the silent room, a challenge in her eyes. "I want more," she said, eyeing the orphans. "Line up facing me," ordered the Lord. The group slowly obeyed. Their backs faced the stairs, and Carolyn could only see a few of them. She glimpsed the guards dropping a small potted plant before each child. Some seemed to realize what was happening and began to fidget. Once the guards stepped back, the Lord commanded, "Begin." The orphans were hesitant, but a glare from Miss Elodie made them oblige. Around the room, plants became unrecognizable. She spotted a boy about her age at the end of the line staring down at his plant. His body shook as the plant bent over, like a force was applied to the middle of its stem. The plant then lay flat in the dirt and spiraled until it looked like a furry pebble. 8 appendages grew out of the sides, but the boy collapsed before he could finish. The Lord prowled along the line of orphans. He looked from the deformed plant to the boy in disdain, kicking aside the pot. The temperature in the room fluctuated from the methods and powers used. There were a variety of techniques, from small storm clouds and rays of light to forcing other objects to attack the plants. Carolyn battled between awe and wariness. These children weren't supposed to do this. They couldn't do this. Throughout her life, well, the 5 years she could remember, it had been drilled into her. You are a standard. Standards have no abilities. Only the Aurelians do. This is why they rule us. But what she was seeing now went against everything she thought she knew. Still, the sight of the different powers excited her, but it was dampened by the twinge of horror she felt when someone collapsed. Her skepticism and uncertainty rose with the fact that a member of the king's court was present and took no action to put a stop to the children. Carolyn watched the orphans attempt, weak with the lack of training and age. The eldest, maybe 13, the Lord observed struggles with scorn. Nothing appealed to him. Suddenly, a flare of scorching heat came from the far end of the row of performers. The man spun to the source and nearly ran over. He bent and examined the plant, but Carolyn's location gave her a disadvantage in sight. She edged out of her hiding spot and stood on her tiptoes, looking overhead. In a small pot, small flames danced around curling leaves that had blackened and crumbled. Her breath caught in her throat. Fire. "Can you do anything else?" asked the Lord. Peering over the staircase, Carolyn could barely see the top of the guilty child's head. By the short hair, she assumed it was a boy. The child didn't answer as the entire room set their eyes upon him. Even Valentina, who up till now wore an expression of perpetual boredom, seemed interested. "Well?" the man pressed. The boy's shoulders bobbed and as he wiped his sweaty palms. The Lord took his hesitance as confirmation. "Do it." As the boy looked helplessly to the others, terrified to comply, a jolt of panic shot through Carolyn when she glimpsed at his face. No, it can't be. It can't be him. She leaned in, praying she was wrong. But the boy tilted his head down, and she could no longer see his face. Her heart pounded as she watched him display another ability, her thoughts torn between the boy's identity and a second power. The ashes of the plant began to stir and rearrange. The black dust took on a fuzzy shape, but she couldn't make out what it was. The girl glanced up at the man, captivated by the little dust storm. Carolyn watched with horror as the boy shook violently. He lasted for another minute before he fell. Her heart stopped when she fully saw his face, her suspicion confirmed. The Lord gasped and grabbed Jax's arm, pushing his sleeve up to his shoulder. He brushed over Jax's upper arm, muttering to himself. He quickly stood and picked up whatever had become of the plant. He held up something small and slender to the light. The girl gasped and clapped a hand over her mouth, but no one noticed. All were fixed on the object in the hands of the Lord. A dagger. The obsidian blade was warped and crooked, but it was a dagger nonetheless. Carolyn's gaze went back to Jax, her mind racing. What would they do with him? Why did the Lord look at Jax's arm? How did Jax have these powers? How did she not know about him? And the fire. The incredible, terrifying fire. No one had possessed fire in over a millennium. And coupled with another power? No Aurelian had two powers. And here, a standard wielded two astonishing ones. "What is his name?" the Lord asked. He looked up from the dagger, and Carolyn forced herself to slink back into the shadows. "Jax," said Miss Elodie eagerly. Hearing his name spoken like he was an animal for sale made Carolyn's blood run cold. Her breath came quick and her heart raced, hands trembling. The Lord addressed one of his guards. "He's the one. He's perfect." The man ran his finger along the misshapen blade and looked to Jax's arm again. "He's mine," he hissed. The guard stepped towards Jax and grabbed him by the shoulders. The boy only groaned as he was dragged across the room to Valentina's feet. She glared down at him like he was filth found in a street gutter. Jax's eyes fluttered and the dagger disintegrated. The Lord wiped his hands on a cloth the other guard handed him, then tossed to the ground. He gazed at the weakened boy with a possessive glint in his eyes. Jax seemed to be unconscious as a guard approached him with a syringe, but the moment the guard touched his arms, Jax's eyes flew open. He scrambled away, screaming. The pure terror in his voice snapped Carolyn into action. She raced out from the stairs and stood protectively over Jax. He clung to her arm, his little finger squeezing her in terror. The guard with the needle stepped toward them, and Jax trembled violently. Carolyn glanced behind her to him, tears welling in her eyes. Jax pressed closer, twisting her arm around to shield him. "Leave him alone," she said, voice shaking. The Lord tilted his head, then snapped his fingers. Carolyn felt Jax being ripped away as the guard grabbed her arm. She turned and saw Jax hauled back by the other guard as he pulled the collar of Jax's shirt. Tears streamed down his face as he struggled to escape. Carolyn tried to shake off her own guard, but he was too strong. She noticed he was clenching the syringe tight enough to crack it. He appeared more concerned with dropping it than breaking it. She swiped at it, and the guard instinctively tightened his grip. The shattering the glass of the syringe. The milky substance inside spilled out, and the glass dug into his hand. In pain and shock, he released her and she raced over to Jax. The guards realized his blunder and snatched the girl's wrist. She cried out at the sudden jolt. Carolyn threw her arm back, blindly shoving at him while she kept her eyes on Jax. There was something warm, and the guard yelled, letting go of her wrist. She wasted no time scrambling toward Jax. The guard holding Jax pulled out a second syringe, this one filled with a clear liquid. Before he could get a chance to inject it, she ran into them. Too small to push the guard away, she pulled at Jax, but the guard's grip was unshakable and only resulted in him kicking her away. Carolyn stumbled, falling onto her back. She spotted a small shard of glass and grabbed it. Racing back to Jax, she stabbed the guard's hand and he cried out, releasing Jax. Jax curled into a fetal position, rocking back and forth. Carolyn tried to calm him, soothing his messy, light brown hair. He opened his eyes, but they focused on something behind her. She swiveled her head to the two guards advancing on them. Once again, she rooted herself in front of Jax. The guard who shattered the syringe grabbed her with both hands and held her with more force than before. "No, no, no!" she said as the second guard went for Jax. Jax saw the guard coming toward him and tried to get away, but the guard was quicker. He gripped Jax's arm with one hand. "Go away!" yelled Jax. No, go away!" He turned to Carolyn, his blue eyes begging for her. "Help! I don't want to go, Carolyn!" The pain and terror in his voice when he cried her name seared through her ears. "Please," she sobbed, "leave him alone. I'm begging you." Carolyn's only response were her frightened faces, an annoyed Lord, and an apprehensive Miss Elodie. With the crushing realization that no one would aid them, Carolyn's struggle and screams intensified. Fear and panic gripped her as she cried out tear-filled pleas and fought against an iron grip. The needle finally pierced Jack's skin. He stared at the liquid draining into his body. Once empty, the guard removed the needle, not bothering to wipe the blood trickling down Jax's arm. Jax lifted his eyes to Carolyn, and a single tear ran down his face before he crumpled. White noise descended upon the girl's ears as she stared at his small body. His little chest rose and fell, proving he was still alive. He would have been more fortunate if he wasn't. Carolyn was numb. She distantly felt the pressure on her wrists relieved. The guard who had imprisoned her went to escort Valentina. When the other threw Jax over his shoulder like a sack of flour, she regained her senses. "No! Jax!" she screamed. "Bring him back! Take me instead! Please! No, you can't! He's so little! Jax! Take me! Come back! Jax!" But she couldn't bring herself to move as she watched the unconscious form of her only family carried out of her life forever. The guard carrying Jax was followed by Valentina, who gave the orphanage a final glare. Before the guard accompanying her walked out, he gave Carolyn a strange look, not of anger or hatred, but regret. His eyes darted to his shoulder where the girl had pushed him earlier. Then he left. She noticed something there, a burn mark on his spotless uniform. Carolyn barely registered the mark when she was pulled upward by her hair. She was painfully twisted around on her knees to the enraged Miss Elodie. "What is wrong with you?" she screeched. Carolyn's hair was nearly ripped out by the woman, and tears of pain mingled with those of sorrow. Insults spewed out by Miss Elodie as she slapped the girl again and again and again. Her face stung so much she was surprised she hadn't lost all feeling. Miss Elodie raised her hand for what seemed like the 100th time. Carolyn closed her eyes and braced herself, but the sting never came. She opened her eyes to the Lord, holding Miss Elodie's wrist. She couldn't help but noticing his hands were clad in ink-black gloves, but couldn't remember seeing them earlier. "Best leave this to me," he said. "Of course, my lord," Miss Elodie said, bewildered. She released Carolyn, and the man did the same to her wrist. She fell to the floor and rubbed her aching scalp. For such a spindly woman, she was quite strong when it came to abusing children. Carolyn gingerly touched her face where she had been struck, and her fingertips came away stained with blood. She had not a moment of relief before the Lord stepped in front of her. Carolyn stood and met his eyes, refusing to be on her knees in front of them. The noble stared at her for a moment. Then his hand shot out and grasped her chin, moving so fast she didn't realize it until his hand was on her face. The Lord's pale eyes bored into her green ones, and the girl stared right back unblinking. "You should know better than to interfere in matters beyond your comprehension." The Lord looked at Carolyn as he spoke, but his voice rose as if he was addressing everyone. He brought her face closer, and she squirmed, the short distance making her uncomfortable. He lowered his voice so only the two of them would hear. "You are beneath us. We are not your equals, but your superiors." The Lord's voice was a soft whisper, but his eyes held a ferocious intensity, and Carolyn forced herself not to drop her gaze. "We are better and stronger, while you are lesser and weaker." The pudgy fingers on her chin tightened, promising bruises. "This is how it always has been, and how it always will be. The sooner you could get that through your insipid brain, the better." He straightened and shoved Carolyn, causing her to stumble to the floor once more. The Lord produced his own cloth and wiped the glove that had touched the girl in disgust. He threw it onto the floor of the orphanage like it belonged there. "Remember your place," he spat at her. The Lord went to the door, but turned right before he left. "You are fortunate that I am kind enough to not alert the king of this." He gestured to the children spared. "I shouldn't even pay, especially after this situation." The Lord glared at the girl. "Yet, as all good men are, I am one of my word." He fished out a bulging coin pouch from his fur coat. Miss Elodie stepped toward the Lord eagerly, the wariness from earlier melting away at the jingling gold. She eyed the pouch greedily, likely imagining all the precious goods she could buy. Gold like that didn't come easy. While the caretaker stared at the pouch with glee, the girl saw it with nausea. That bag was the cost of Jax's life. It was why her life would fall into shambles. The girl's attention was drawn to Miss Elodie when she made a small, distraught sound. The girl followed her gaze to the Lord as he opened the pouch and reached in. "My lord?" Miss Elodie squeaked. The Lord didn't glance at her as he emptied half the pouch's contents into his gloved palm. "I said I would pay the full amount for an undisturbed meeting. You are lucky I'm giving you anything. Not to mention my silence on the unprovoked attack your ward staged on my guards, nearly injuring my daughter and I in the process. Or I could enlighten the king of the children under your watch, which could land you in prison, if you're lucky. You know the law quite well, don't you?" Miss Elodie frantically nodded. The Lord smiled, glad to have reached an understanding. He tossed the remaining coins to Miss Elodie without bothering to secrete. The coins scattered and the caretaker dove to the floor, scrambling to pick up anything remotely shiny. The Lord looked down at Miss Elodie distastefully. "Peasants," he muttered. Carolyn glared at the Lord with such hatred that a child should never have the power to possess. The Lord returned our gaze. After a few moments, a strange emotion flickered in the Lord's eyes. Right as it appeared, a high-pitched voice pierced the air. "Father?" The Lord glared at her a moment longer, gave the orphanage a final once-over, and departed. The Lord had barely shut the door when everything erupted. Miss Elodie grabbed Carolyn's arm. She had yanked the child upwards, and Carolyn heard something pop, followed by a searing pain in her shoulder. She screamed, but Miss Elodie only tightened her grip. "You stupid girl! After all I've done for you, you ruined my one chance at a decent life. I knew it. I knew you were trouble. I told him you were a mistake, that you should have stayed away." Carolyn was terrified. She'd always known Miss Elodie was unrelentingly cruel and a tad crazy, but this was a new sight to her. The woman's eyes were wild, her fingers tearing at her hair, spit flying everywhere. The caretaker rambled without sense. "They deserved it. They all did. Didn't know when or where to stop. They brought it upon themselves. They burned themselves to the ground." Miss Elodie giggled madly as if she'd told a clever joke. "Oh, how the tables have turned! They took so much pride in the flames of their world. They probably didn't notice when it turned them all to ashes." "And you," Miss Elodie gave Carolyn such a loathing, horrible glare, she was surprised she didn't disintegrate on the spot. "You stupid girl! God knows why you're still here. You should have died like the rest of them. Why anyone wasted their breath on you is a wonder. But that's it. I'm done." Miss Elodie's voice went up octaves, making her sound absolutely insane. "You're a hopeless case. A pointless, worthless, miserable thing who can't do anything right and has doomed herself and all who touch her." With that, Carolyn got a hold of herself. She was finished taking all the abuse from Miss Elodie. Jax was gone, and although it broke her heart into pieces, it gave her a newfound strength as well. Strength to finally stand up, tug her body away from the woman who had the nerve to call herself a caretaker. Carolyn stood straight and looked her in the eye. No, she whispered, and slapped Miss Elodie with all the force she could muster. Miss Elodie froze, shocked at being stood up to after so many years. Carolyn turned away and marched to the door. She threw the door of the orphanage wide open to the pouring rain. Go, girl, Miss Elodie cackled. You won't last long in this world. Carolyn shook off the woman's ramblings and stared out into the downpour. She felt bony hands digging into her back and was pushed outside. The girl tumbled down the steps, landing on her injured shoulder. She screamed in pain, and black spots danced before her. The door slammed shut, leaving her in agony. She stayed in the same position for what could have been minutes or hours. Distantly, she heard the clock tower chime. Carolyn stared at the doors of the only place she'd known in her life, or at least the 5 years she could remember. The storm had cleared out in the city, sending everyone home to escape the blows of the wind and rain. No one left to witness the girl left for dead. Finally, she rose to her feet, swaying. Carolyn was careful to keep pressure off of her arm, but the steps had collided with her head, leaving her severely disoriented. She tripped over her own feet and fell again, her injured arm slamming into the hard ground. She cried out, and tears, she thought, dried up, ran down her face, mixing with the rain. Her breath came fast. The pain in her arm was so harsh and poignant, she had to focus to remain conscious. Once more, she stood, slower than before. When she rose, she realized she hadn't been outside. Ever. She didn't even have shoes. She hadn't needed them in the orphanage, and the broken street cut into her bare feet. Carolyn stumbled past a vendor's stall and saw a paper fluttering in the raging wind. It was a notice that the taxes had once again risen to support the spread of the kingdom's empire. Although she had never been outside, she had spent a lot of time looking out her window at the world, enough to see there were quite a few people with financial issues. She was able to predict this would drive more people to destitute. Her eyes landed on the image at the bottom of the notice. It was the crest of none other than the Lord of Rioda. A surge of white-hot anger coursed through the girl, accompanied by the hatred she had never felt before. It almost frightened her. In a fit of fury, the girl tore off the notice, not giving a damn about who was watching. She felt the gaze of a security camera digging into her back as her teeth shredded the sheet, and the pieces flew into the wind. A flash of lightning struck near the girl, but she didn't flinch. As she watched the paper soar along the street, the Lord's words rang in her head. Remember your place. I will, she thought angrily, and you will too. We're going to get caught if you don't stop moving. Well, it's going to rain, and I don't want to get wet. I roll my eyes and look up at the sky. There are a few small gray clouds, but not enough to warrant any concern. Finn, it's not going to rain before we're done, if it even rains at all, I say, exasperated. Loading days are already hard enough, and doing anything with Finn is so mentally taxing that he's always begged not to go out on jobs. Not that he minds. The lazy fool would gladly sit around all day. If it wasn't for the fact, he'd be on his own in the streets if he didn't pull his weight. Where are all the Aurelians? Finn asks. They're usually crowding the whole city today. As if I didn't notice our suppliers aren't here, I reply. Don't you think it's a bit odd? They never miss a day. As Finn speaks, his voice becomes louder. He's oblivious, of course, to the strange glances pedestrians give to the talking bush. I clap a hand over his mouth. Finn, be quiet! The city guard already has it out for me. I don't need you getting me caught. I shake him a bit for good measure and resume my search for an ignorant loader. How is this even going to work? It's not like they're going to hand out their money to us. Were you not listening to anyone before we left? I asked incredulously. He has the gall to shrug. I stare at him, considering how much trouble I'd get into if I shoved him in front of a speeding horse. The nobility are too wealthy for their own good, I remind him. Our sector's got the highest quality goods sold, meaning more loaders. Sometimes they'll get careless with their purse and happen to lose a few coins here and there. Finn stares at me blankly. What do you mean? I groan. Ugh. How is it possible for someone to be this dense? On the off chance they notice their pockets are a little lighter, they'll assume they bought an overpriced necklace or left their change at a seamstress. While a little extra money means the world to us, it's another tax for them to add on, I add bitterly. In the distance, the clock tower bell rings through the air 19 times. I groan and shift my position. It's been 3 hours since Finn and I came to the market. It should have been a 1 to 2 hour task of bumping through a few nobles, keeping our heads down. Then we'd return with enough money to last our crew at least a month. But Finn and I have been crouching behind the same bush for hours, waiting for even one loader to walk by. Where are they? I mutter. Along with the lack of nobles, it appears everything has lost its life today. The vendors, regularly yelling over one another and vying for the attention of customers, cry out half-heartedly as if skeptical they will sell anything at all and may as well save their energy. Usually, children run around the stalls and chase after one another in their games, but they don't run as fast today. They seem tired and play like it's a chore. The people always bustling from one seller to another while constantly chattering are abnormally quiet, shuffling from one stall to the next with their eyes half open. It's like the lack of nobility gracing us with their scheduled presence has leached the world dry of its energy. Only the city guard act normally. They prowl through, their eyes scanning everything and anything, searching for someone to cause a problem with. The guards assume they're above the rest of us standards, although all are standards like us. The crest of Ryoda printed on their gray chests give them the twisted ideal the rest of us are worthless. One guard with an especially malicious expression sets his eye on a nearby woman's bosom. He smirks and nudges the guard next to him. The two stare at the woman and launch into a conversation about the woman based on their gestures and expressions. The woman notices and glances down at her chest, then back at the guards. She meets their eyes and they give her an awful grin. She puts her head down, cheeks flaming, and rushes away. The guards laugh for a bit and move along, looking for another to harass. My temper rises. It's all too common that the guards take on this sense of authority and abuse it with no repercussions, supposedly here to keep the peace and ensure the safety of standards. We would be better off without them. Their inflated sense of superiority is almost matched with those of the nobility. The only difference is that the guards don't discriminate on who to victimize. It's always whoever is unfortunate enough to fall in their path. Out of nowhere, a carriage runs past Finn and I. Finn falls over and I yank him up by the collar of his shirt. The horses sped by so fast I couldn't get a proper view of the coach. But it doesn't matter. Loaders come in packs like wolves. Finally, I sigh. The horses halt a few yards away from our bush, but the carriage is at an angle where only the rear is visible. I still can't see the crest. It's fine, I tell myself. But I can't help getting a strange feeling about its arrival. The solid black carriage isn't adorned except for a thin gold design along the bottom, swirling and curling its way around. From what I glimpsed of the horses, their coats are pure, gleaming white. Although I despise anything to do with the nobility, I have to admit how elegant the carriage is. Simple, yet beautiful. A first for the Aurelians. Nothing is simple with them. The carriage door opens and I crouch lower in the leaves. A city guard rushes over to the occupant, and I barely make out the sight of him holding the door. The sound of feet landing onto the street follows with an ice-cold breeze blowing through out of place in the late summer day, shaking me to my core. I nearly gasp from the shock and bite my tongue. I look around to see if anyone else felt the strange wind, but no one seems to be affected. Yet something else seems to have come over the people. The idle, spiritless beings are no more. In their place, it's the usual bustling, energetic crowd, flitting from stall to stall and talking with one another. Children dart around individuals to get to each other. But something is still off. The crowd radiates an uneasy feeling. They move carefully and deliberately, as though one wrong move could break them. The children look before they step, hesitate before touching the others, like they aren't sure if they're about to grab a friend or foe. Thunder rolls in the distance, as if it isn't sure it's allowed to advance. Do you see this? I turn to Finn, who has his eyes fixed on the carriage. Yes, but where are the others? I don't think these have much on them. Just look at that carriage. It's so plain. They're probably one of the lower ranks. Not that, I grasp his head and force him to watch the marketplace. Look, don't you see anything unusual? He shrugs. No, it all looks normal to me, other than the fact that there aren't any loaders. I roll my eyes. Of all people, of course Finn wouldn't notice anything out of the ordinary, if it didn't relate to himself. I glance at the marketplace and groan. The number of guards have somehow tripled. Even if we don't draw any attention to ourselves, returning to the warehouse is going to be hard. As I rack my brain for a way to escape, something snaps to my right. My heart stops. With Finn at my left, there's no one else here. I grab my knife and swivel to the right. Just as I'm about to get whatever is in front of me, I look up to see a terrified Finn, his hands thrown up in front of him. I pull my knife back at the last second, less than an inch from his stomach. Finn! Why did you switch sides? We agreed on this. Don't move unless I tell you otherwise. I try to keep my breathing under control. I don't want Finn to know how shaken I am. Everything about today is putting me on edge. It doesn't feel right. Well, why did you try to stick me? He demands. Instinct. Finn's face flushes red. His attempts at making a coherent sentence in anger are laughable, and I shush him. He faces forward again, fuming. A satisfied smirk finds its way to my lips. Finn becomes furious whenever I reply to him with instinct, because he assumes I'm writing him off whenever I answer like that. In his defense, I usually am. I roll my shoulders and wrap my fingers around the pendant beneath my shirt. Discreetly, I slip my knife back into the slit in my pants on the side of my left thigh with my free hand. All my pants, or at least the 2 pairs I own, have the same incision in the same place, courtesy of Kea, one of the few people who truly know me. I don't have to worry about Finn noticing the knife's place. He's gone back to staring at the sky, watching for a sign from above to signify his impending doom of a rainstorm. Can we go already? Finn whines. They're not coming today. We're wasting our time sitting here. I resist the growing urge to slap him. Finn, do you think I've been crouching here for hours on end without food or water and risk getting caught by the guards to spend time with you? Because trust me, I'm not. No, I am here so we don't risk freezing to death or starvation in the coming weeks. But hey, if you want to, we can leave. Really? Finn looks at me eagerly, hazel eyes wide with anticipation. Yeah, but you are going to be the one to tell everyone the reason we'll be struggling is because you got tired and bored. Oh, and God forbid you could have gotten a little rain on you. So since you knew best, based on your experience of about, 0 loading days, you decided it would be best if we gave up and left. I shrug. Finn's brow furrows as he contemplates my words, or at least the ones that manage to get through his thick skull. He begins to speak, but I glare at him. He thinks better of it and turns around. I roll my eyes for what must be the 100th time today. Although he's only about a year younger than me at 16, he's a complete moron. I'm pretty sure he knows it, too, and uses it to his advantage. He evades undesirable jobs and tasks that require actual effort by screwing up. Eventually, he isn't trusted to do about anything without constant supervision. He's assigned cleaning, safe and simple enough that he won't mess up. Somehow, he manages to get the work done fast and efficiently, securing his place with the rest of us. Yet, today, it was decided Finn needed to contribute more and he had to do other various tasks. With my fantastic luck, I was nominated to have the honor of accompanying Finn to his first official loading day. Raised voices from the carriage grabbed my attention. The guard who rushed over earlier backs into view. The sunlight gleams off the beads of sweat dripping down his face, and his hands twist into explanatory gestures, lips forming rapid words. I assume the guard is ordered to return as his feet drag him back to the Aurelian. A voice begins to rise until the speaker is yelling, and I catch a few words saying, "Easier like this. You are required to do as I command. I am..." The words become muffled, but I can make out the tone of the voice. It sounds as though someone has covered the speaker's mouth with a pillow, erasing the words, but not the sound. As if a sort of sound barrier is in place. A chill runs down my back as the Aurelian's purpose slams into me. Another transfer. I force myself not to bolt from behind the bush and race back into the warehouse. I'm stuck with Finn, and with the stress of the approaching transfer, he'll be flighty. If he's caught, I'd be responsible for losing a member of the crew. Not that it would be much of a loss. "Finn, we have to go." He eyes me apprehensively. "Are you messing with me?" "No, I'm not. Haven't you noticed the noise from the carriage?" "Well, I haven't really paid much attention to it." He tilts his head towards the carriage, the words shielded by the barrier. It takes a couple of minutes before it clicks, and his eyes widen in fear. "Oh no," he whispers. "Not today." I nod grimly. Even Finn knows the signs of a transfer. No loaders, an influx of guards, and Aurelian power used in our presence. I'll bet, subtly, it was drilled into him when he first came to us, as everyone else. Transfer days are risky for anyone nearby. The transfer doesn't explain the odd nervous standards, but I can't think about that now. Finn and I are pressed for time. Guards are vigilant and demand to search anyone and everyone. Certain sectors, sometimes the entire city is put on lockdown. A transfer has never been done on a loading day, though. They take place on less crowded market days, where there aren't many about, either working or at home, keeping witnesses to a minimum. It's not often anyone besides the child's family to see a transfer take place, but word spreads faster than the plague in cities with not much to do to pass the time. However, details get muddled as whispers pass from mouth to mouth. Families' lips are sealed with gold to keep the truth hidden. The promise of an improved lifestyle for a year enough to push down their sorrow and move on. A few desperate ones sell out their neighbors, even their children, for a reward. Some try getting away with framing others, but they end up lacking the ability to spread lies without their tongues to form them. There are ones who refuse the jingling bags of treachery, who possess the will to speak the truth, but they don't live around here anymore. Or at all. Some people want to see the process of a child recognized as a transfer. Evidence Aurelians aren't the only ones who have power, although it's rarely on display. The monthly claims of the king that being a transfer is a great privilege and honor attempt to erase the anger brought by the stolen children. The statements worm their way into the minds of many, but rumors of horrid process dampens anyone's willingness to accept it easily. But what's done is done, and we all move on. Most of us. Those who wish to witness the revelation of a transfer in their ability have no idea how lucky they are. They don't know how fortunate they are to have never seen the reality of it, of taking an innocent life and snuffing it out in a few minutes. Memories struggle to resurface as I force them as far down as possible. But echoes of screaming and fighting and begging and crying pulsed in from my head. "Lynn, what do we do?" Finn voice snaps me back to our current situation. My fingers brush against the pendant tucked beneath my shirt, aching for a thread of comfort. Then I speak. Listen to me very carefully. You screw this up and we're dead. You follow every and any instruction I give you if you want to get out of here without any problems. Got it? I don't break eye contact with him as his head bobs up and down. I'm not exaggerating when I say we're as good as dead if anything goes wrong and we're caught. Anyone discovered leaving a sector on lockdown is immediately screened to determine if they're transferred. Sometimes a relict is discovered through the screenings. Only a couple of them are found each year, as all children with abilities are whisked away from their lives. I don't know how they weed out transfers, but they always manage to grab them. Sometimes a few get away and end up as relics. They can't become a transfer since the success rate for transfer tapers off at the age of 13. For Aurelians, though, they're still able to grab abilities until 15. As usual, everything plays out to their benefit. Len, there are more. What? The guards. There are more than earlier. What's going on? Finn points to the market and my jaw drops. Somehow, even more guards have crowded the area. Everyone's pushed so close together that people are nearly spilling over each other. My eyes stray to the shiny gold pistol strapped to the belts of the many guards. Eager fingers hover over the deadly triggers. I curse under my breath, recognizing nearly half the guards. It's going to take a miracle to get out of here. I take a deep breath. All right, Finn. I can't believe I'm saying this, but thankfully you're with me today instead of someone else. His eyebrows shoot up. Really? I roll my eyes. Don't get excited. It's only because you've never actually done a job other than maid duty. You won't be recognized, just irrelevant. Nothing new. He starts to respond to my jab, but I push forward before he can get a word out. You've never been this far from the warehouse, and you'll get lost trying to go back on your own. So follow my every word. You're going to make your way to the back entrance near the alley. You know where that is, right? Finn nods. Good. That part's never crowded, so not many guards will be watching there. You have to hurry. Once they go into lockdown, we're screwed. His head dips again, understanding the severity of our situation. Neither of us want to experience the excruciating relic tests. And after that happy experience, we'd have the two options given to standards. Either bribe the guards for a quick release or remain in custody for a while. In my case, being a favorite of the guards, I'd immediately be locked up for a couple months, maybe longer. There aren't laws protecting prisoners. The guards are free to carry out their abuse, and the extent of their disciplinary action isn't limited. I wouldn't be in as much danger if I didn't take every opportunity to make life hell for the guards. A few of my actions in the name of retribution cycle through my mind. Dropping a beehive through the window of their barracks in the middle of the night, having them chase and apprehend a wanted criminal, me, around in the snow after said criminal set off the alarm in the barracks in the middle of the night, only to find out the person they caught was a scarecrow on wheels covered in an old cloak. All in all, the guards have reason to hate me. Damn security cameras. And they wouldn't hesitate to toss me in a cell for a while. Looking back at the market, I noticed something odd. A strange smoke hovers an inch or two above the ground. It's a grayish fog, but near impossible to see as it fades in and out of existence. I watch as it thickens every few seconds. As the smoke darkens, the crowd becomes more agitated, as if with each blackening shade, the people become a bit more unhinged. Vendors scream maniacally, almost throwing their wares onto the other. People reach at stalls, grabbing at things they can never afford with crazed faces. Children sprint and tackle each other. The only normal ones are the guards, still walking around with an air of entitlement. They act as though everything is ordinary. Finn, tell me you see this, I say in disbelief. See what? Out of the corner of my eye, Finn looks at me as if I'm the one who has lost their mind. What are you talking about? How can you not see that? I fling my arm out to the market. They've gone insane. No, I think you have. I cross my arms and open my mouth to fire back when the sound of a whip cracking splits the air. For a moment, everything is silent. Then the market refills with energy, but this time it's normal. Everyone seems to be fine. Shoppers calmly go from stall to stall, chatting with each other. Children play with ease, breezing by and laughing. Even the smoke has vanished. For a moment, I question whether I imagined everything. But then I see disheveled clothing and wild hair. Yet people straighten themselves out, not confused as how they ended up in such a state. There is still a multitude of guards and the carriage is still there, but no noise comes from it. They must be starting soon. Finn, go now. Don't stop anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. Keep your head down and run. Quickly, they could start the transfer at any minute. Don't leave the alley until I get there, no matter what. Finn nods and slips out. He jogs across the road, separating me and the market, and merges with the crowd. I survey the line of stalls, searching for somewhere free of guards. Thankfully, I spot a clearing near the edge of the market. Rising, I head for the road, eager to leave. Suddenly, my legs give out from beneath me. Crouching behind a bush for hours on end has left my legs painfully stiff, and I sit for a minute with my legs out in front of me. The stiffness subsides, and I straighten, sprinting across the road. Slowing to a stop, my nose wrinkles, the odor of old, rotting garbage permeating the air. The absence of light, haphazard stacking of trash block out a considerate amount of the sun's glow, giving the place an eerie shadow. I fail to suppress a shiver, not from the oddly cold breeze belonging to winter weeks away, but the darkness. As the night threatens to capture the sun, shadows grow, promising to envelop all who are unfortunate enough to unknowingly wander into its smothering embrace. I despise the dark. It is a haven to monsters of the past and present, and many times the future. I make my way out of the minefield of filth, stepping over stray bags that miss their mark. After an alarming number of near missteps, questionable substances, I stumble into the wave of people that seem to grow by the minute. A cold mist wraps itself around my ankles, and I look down sharply, the sight enough to lock me in place. I barely feel the mass of people pushing and shoving past me as I stare at the smoke shrouding my feet. Ripping my gaze from my feet, I whip my head around, searching if the smoke has chosen only me as its victim. I find it has laid itself like a blanket, a few inches off the ground, across the paths through the stalls. Everywhere. A stinging sensation where the fog hugs my bare legs fails to capture my attention as my eyes dart to everyone and everything. The memory of what happened mere minutes ago with the wild crowd is fresh in my mind. Yet, everyone seems to be fine, and the burning at my legs becomes so fierce that I finally acknowledge it and look down. I try to raise my foot, but the smoke has other ideas. I struggle to break free of the source, but the gas is reluctant to release its hold. Finally, I manage to yank my foot up, and a sudden severe wave of pain hits me, causing me to cry out. An angry red welt wraps around my leg where smoke met flesh. My skin feels like someone held a torch to it. I blink back, tears of pain. The sight of my seemingly burned ankle giving way to a bout of panic. Against my wish to stay as far away from the smoke, I slowly lower my leg. I bite my lip as my skin protests further contact with the harmful substance, and another wave of agony is my reward. I steady the horde of people. The smoke touches them, but they seem unfazed. Panic claws its way up my throat. Why am I the only one hurt? Why doesn't anyone else see the smoke? Then, as if triggered by my thoughts, the past begins to repeat itself as the crowd begins to stir. I watch the faces around me, a witness an up-close version of the disturbing expressions I viewed at a distance earlier. The movements of bodies become stiff and forced, as though each person is fighting to keep control of their actions. If I thought what I saw earlier was frightening, then this is downright terrifying. All around me, I watch as everyone seems to have collectively lost hold on their sanity. As the crowd grows restless, the smoke thickens and rises until everything below my knees is hidden. The situation settles into a ball of fear in my chest. I've got to get thin. I've got to leave. I duck my head down, careful about being recognized, and head to where Finn should be. I glance up to make sure I'm headed in the right direction and spot a guard walking towards me. I dart to the side and hide within the colorful fabrics of a stall. Peering out from the soft material, I breathe a sigh of relief when he's gone. But an odd detail about the guard stands out. He was undisturbed, like the guards earlier. The usual stance of the head held high and the superiority exuding from him was like every other day. He was also headed in the opposite direction of the crowd, who, for some reason, are all strangely heading in one direction. The center of the market. The fact only adds to my dread and anxiety, and my heart thumps in my chest. I leave the stall and continue my way to Finn, clutching my pendant. My head snaps back. I cry out and fall to the ground, the force of the pull leaving my body with no choice other than to follow the hand dragging me down by my hair. I lie back, the smoke stinging my face with cold needles. A disconcerting face looms over me, blurred by the smoke and a black fog behind him. The man holding me releases his grip on my hair, only to make a grab for my face. I roll away and leap to my feet, kicking him in the chest and sending him crashing into the wooden poles of the stall I hid in moments before. Along with everyone else, the man seemed out of control of his actions, and a hint of guilt found its way into me. But the feeling is overridden by the renewed agony coursing through my body. The smoke covered me completely when I fell, resulting in pain. Pain everywhere. My arms are red and aggravated, every inch of bare skin stinging and burning. My eyes are irritated, and I rub at them frantically. It hurts. Everything hurts, and all I want is for it to go away. Shrieks emanate from the air. The screeching is a wail of agony brought by years of endless torment. The noise becomes louder, all yelling and incoherent sounds. The intensity rises, and I clamp my hands over my ears, clawing at them in an attempt to block out the endless cacophony. It doesn't stop. Nothing stops. And they're all pulling and screaming, and I'm about to go under and lose myself in the pandemonium. I just want to leave, I scream. And it's all chaos and mayhem that offer no promise of respite. Then suddenly, once again, the sound of a whip cracking, the crowd calming down as if nothing was wrong. The smoke fading away after a moment, I tentatively lower my hands and look around. It's the same before. No one realizes how insane they were moments ago. I notice I'm near the center of the market and slap my palm against my forehead. The current of bodies must have steered me here. I turn prepared to leave this place when I hear the sound of glass shattering, the screaming of terror and pain, and all hell breaks loose.